Thank you, Ashley and Joe. And good morning and welcome for all of those of you who are coming up online to join us this morning, our spiritual family across the United States. It's kind of fun to know that you're all here and supporting us from a distance. Wish you were here because it's a beautiful day in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you should be here to join us. But we're glad you're online and joining us as we continue the study of the book, Mightier Than Circumstance by Frank B. Whitney. Now, there's also a handout. Those of you who are here have it in your program. If you are online, you can get it at tulsaunity.com and click on the Sunday Lesson tab. It is there, as well as the other handouts that we've had over the series of this month as we go through this extremely little book, but very powerful book. Now, Mightier Than Circumstance was written, or I should say, it was published in 1935. And it was a compilation of stories and writings by Frank B. Whitney, who was the founding father, if you will, the brainchild of our current magazine that we know as Daily Word. Began in July 1923. For the next 14 years, Frank wrote every single Daily Word. I can't even imagine how much writing that is, because if you read the Daily Word regularly, you know it's not just the Daily Word, but there's also little articles in there, and there's also poetry. Frank was a prolific poet, and for 14 years, he wrote the vast majority of things that you read in the Daily Word. Now, interesting to note about this book, a couple things that just intrigue me, is that it was never really written as a book, because Frank Whitney, as I said, was a prolific author in many ways, shapes, and forms. So what they did is they composited it and compiled it together. So what you see sometimes is that themes and thoughts and ideas sort of repeat themselves, maybe one or two of the articles later. They say, what, didn't we just read about this a little bit ago? And yes, in fact, it's true, as they tried to pull all of this huge amount of information into one book. But something we ran into last week that kind of challenged us, and that is we came face to face with what I'm going to call the evolution of unity. In other words, we saw a passage in our handout that talked about health. And Whitney said that when you are affirming health, you have to hold the truth of health, you have to hold the words of health. Yes, I get that. But if you don't get healthy, then it's your fault. Now, in the early days, you will find in almost all of the unity literature this kind of cadence. So let's talk about what's happening here. First of all, Frank B. Whitney is what I'd call the second generation unity. Frank Whitney got into unity in around 1919. Unity started in 1889. Too many nines in this story. So he was in that second generation. By the time he got involved in unity, think of this. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, back in 1889, started as a publishing house. Then they took their articles and magazines they began to publish, and about 6 to 9 months later, they began the Society of Silent Help, which we know today as Silent Unity. Well, then, as time goes on, they're teaching classes. They have a correspondence school. You could write and say, send me the correspondence school, and they said, sure, you just here, just sort of like online classes now. And so it was a very dynamic, alive time. Then there's a little bit of a dip as we see America become involved in the First World War. In 1918, when the war was over, the soldiers are coming home, there's a huge need for an understanding, because our soldiers really, for the first time in history, went and saw other cultures, were in other lands, were exposed to other religions, and they came back wanting to know more than ever before. And of course, we see that repeated every time during the Second World War, during Vietnam. There's sort of the fallout of sending people to countries they've never been to before, and it's a mind-blowing experience. So they come back home, and into the scene steps Frank Whitney. Frank Whitney now is seeing unity. First of all, they build a building on Tracy Street, downtown Kansas City. The day they opened the building, they cut the ribbon, and they moved in. And Charles said, "We've outgrown the place, honey." They had to buy the building next door almost immediately. So now we've got these two buildings. They've got a printing house. Do you know that Unity published, on an average, of 4, if not 5 magazines a month? This was the day and age of magazines. Can you imagine? They printed a Businessman's Weekly, Unity Businessman's Weekly. They printed Wee Wisdom. How many were raised with Wee Wisdom? Of course, the children's magazine. They printed Daily Word, and they printed the Unity magazine. So our printing presses were going like a house of fire. And of course, there was a huge need for written material into all of those magazines and stuff. It was a dynamically alive time. And somewhere we're talking the 1920s now, the Prosperity Banks. How many remember the Prosperity Banks with Lowell Fillmore? Charles and Myrtle were still alive. All this kind of stuff is happening. We do not see this kind of energy in unity today. Now, I want to make something very, very clear. Every startup company goes through this. I don't care what startup company. Apple Computer went through it. Microsoft went through it. Any company that you have ever belonged to that starts up, there's this creative, massive, exciting energy that comes with any organization that's new. And there comes a point in time where it crests, and then what's everybody trying to do? Reinvent themselves, right? And Unity is no exception. So we went through this. Frank Whitney was at a time when this group of people were on fire to change the world. And I need you to hear that, because a lot of the stuff they were just writing, and they had the healers on staff, and they had the Silent Unity prayer ministry that was led by Myrtle herself. She was handwriting notes. Emily Cady was writing lessons in truth. Charles Fillmore was teaching classes. It's huge energy that's coming in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, and slowly kind of finding its own way into the 1940s. So Frank Whitney's writings are very dynamic. They're all you have to do is affirm it, deny it, and it's done. And yet, we now, years later, are struggling with this. And what I love about Unity is that we're willing to take a look kind of at ourselves, and we're willing to sort of understand that our point of view, our theological point of view, is evolutionary. Think of it. Charles Fillmore wrote the book from a series of classes in 1900. Well, it's actually 1890, called Christian Healing. Listen to the name of the book. In 1945, his very last book was called Atom Smashing Power. Listen to the difference, okay? The man absorbed science. And of course, there's a proliferation of science and technology going on in this time, which Unity grasped onto also for a greater understanding. Because what we did was revolutionary, my friends. It inspires me still. We said, God is not Santa Claus. God is not the big guy in the sky who denies you, who gives you favors, who heals you but doesn't heal you. We said, wait a minute. There is an eternality. There is a vibration. There's a mystery. There's an energy, whatever word you want to use, that undergirds all things. That undergirds all things. And it is without exception. It didn't matter, Charles Fillmore said, what you believed. It didn't matter what faith tradition you followed. It didn't matter if you didn't believe at all, because the reality was the energy still flowed. And he called that energy life, love, intelligence, and power, the attributes of God, the great mystery of God. And so in those early days, Fillmore, as well as Whitney, passionately believed in what we call truth principles with a capital T. There is only one presence, there's only one power. We say it every Sunday, okay? But what is that? Another truth principle that we say over and over again that we get challenged by is thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Yes, I believe that passionately. I believe that is a fundamental truth with a capital T, a principle. But you know what? I've stood in front of the mirror for years and said, I am healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, and nothing has happened. Thoughts held in mind. All I have to do is think about it. See, and that's what Whitney kind of makes it sound like in his book. That's what our early authors make it sound like. All you have to do is get that one affirmation of truth, and you hold it until you can't hold it anymore, and therefore you will be healed. And if you are not healed, the problem is you. Well, what happened over the next generation? Remember I said Frank Whitney was like in the second generation of unity? Now we get into the third and fourth generations of unity. At a time when we begin to understand that between the principle is correct, the principle is right, and the very human reality, the experience of it, there's something we call emotions. There's something we call belief systems. There's something we call psychology, which, remember, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung were peers of Charles Fillmore. So this was all happening at one time. It was that dynamic time of life. And so we begin to see now, over the years, that it's not just a simple, it is true, it is a principle that all I have to do is thoughts held in mind produce after their kind, yet I understand more deeply that the call is going to ask me to let go. The call is going to ask me to forgive. The call is going to take me deeper and deeper into a psychological soul journey. So what happened as we come into the fourth and fifth, our own generations, is that these truth principles have become the foundation through which we know people today. For example, Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer was a psychologist, right? And so Wayne Dyer, when you read him, he sounds very unity, doesn't he? Well, the truth is, he attended unity. Wayne Dyer. So, psychologically, how about Deepak Chopra? Deepak Chopra, a medical man, a man of science. He believed in these foundational principles. In his in his book, his groundbreaking work, 1990, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind. Listen to the title, Ageless Body. Your body is never meant to age. Timeless Mind. You will always be connected to these principles. This book was groundbreaking that a medical scientist said those principles are true. First time I ever heard Deepak Chopra speak was the Unity of Sacramento. We resonate with that. Are you aware, those of you who are familiar with the 12-step program, that Bill W.'s friend Al, his wife was secretary to Emmett Fox, who was a unity minister. And so you see, even the 12-step programs, when you talk about a higher power and a higher consciousness, a spiritual awakening, you are talking about unity principles. Next Sunday, you want to be here, because we're going to listen to the podcast with Brené Brown. Now, Brené Brown is an author. Brené Brown is a scientist. Brené Brown is a scholar. She teaches at the, I always want to say Unity, University of Houston. And she talks about vulnerability. She talks about heart. You see how we're evolving? The truth is the truth is the truth. It is fundamental principle. There's only one presence, there's only one power that undergirds everything. But our experience of it is a whole nother thing. That to experience that presence and power of God, we've got work to do. And that's part of what Whitney is talking about in his book. We've got to train our mind. Remember that very first Sunday? We got to train our mind to wake up and say, it's a brand new day, a brand new world, a brand new life for me. Wow. That's hard. It is hard. Because I want to get up and say, really? Oh no, it's Sunday. Let's see, am I ready for this? I don't know. We wake up in our humanness, don't we? And it's very difficult to stop ourselves even before our mind. I barely got my foot on the ground, and my mind is going, How do I practice the presence and the power of God? So it's important for us to understand these principles, because right now, what I did is I took the center section of the book and then gave you some quotes from the center section of the book, because next week, the end of the book is all about health. And we are going to focus on health, because that is a very primary, fundamental teaching of unity, is about health. So where do we connect with this? How do we start? It's just hopeless? We have our past to deal with. We have our emotions to deal with. We just got this. I don't even know where to start. I get it, but I don't get it. Whitney says, hold it. There is one foundational principle that we must work to understand, embrace, live, and that is the foundational principle of the Christ. Now, be very clear. Pause a minute. I would say, by and large, the vast majority of us have all been raised in a Christian tradition which puts Jesus and Christ together. Jesus and Christ are not together. Christ is not Jesus' last name. In our teaching, we believe that Jesus is a man of history who was born and died some 2,000 years ago. He was a preacher, he was a sage, he was a healer, and he was able to do that because he understood the principle called the Christ. And the principle called the Christ is a universal principle that is the divine within. The divine within. And so every experience, every thought, Whitney goes on and on about, if you want success, stop looking out here. If you want health, stop looking out here. You've got what you need inside of you. But we're so used to Googling the answer, because out there must be smarter than us, that we don't hear our own answer. And this is what he's talking about, is that you need to honor and behold the Christ within you. And when you can behold it in the Christ within you, then I can see it in the evil people in the world. I can see it in the sick people in the world. I can see it in the actions in the world that don't necessarily agree with mine. But folks, it doesn't happen overnight. We all know that. Because it's such an easy habit to fall back into judgment and criticism. Some years ago, I read that Myrtle Fillmore, toward the end of her life, our co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore, was like 80-something years old at that point, and she wrote to someone, she said, the one habit I just do not seem to be able to break is that of judgment and criticism. Oh, that gave me hope. And I beat myself up and I go, you shouldn't be so judgmental about being judgmental. It's like, there you have it. Even our co-founder struggled. Even a woman of great consciousness struggled. So if you struggle with seeing the Christ in someone, say, I'm just like Myrtle. I'm going to keep working at it. I'm going to keep working at it till the day I die and beyond. Because you know what? I'll get up to the pearly gates and I think, well, who let you in here? We're judging. So we have to really give some thought, really give some process. What does it mean to behold the Christ? Now you might be saying, well, wait a minute, where does Jesus fit into this? What we teach in unity is that Jesus of Nazareth, sage, teacher, healer, revolutionary, came to show us a way to understand this Christ principle. And he did that by trying to live it in his own life. And that's why we study what he said and what he did, to try and get the nuggets from his teachings so that we understand to live a Christ life is going to call us into accountability, isn't it? It is going to call us into integrity and responsibility. It's just living a Christ life doesn't mean, I've got the outfit, I've got the Birkenstocks, and now I'm living the Christ life. That is not the Christ life. It's about humility, and it's about wisdom, and it's about an inner life where we don't have to constantly say, oh, that's right, they have the Christ in them. No. We get it. We understand it. We resonate with it because we get that we have the Christ within us. And as I can more fully appreciate, accept, bless, and be grateful for that light within myself, then how much easier it is to share it with you. I want you all to get your hymnals out. They're right in front of you or under the seat. Turn to page 65. 65. Looky there. I behold the Christ in you. And who is the author of the poetry words? Frank B. Whitney. This is one of his famous poems. And you will notice several things about this song. Number one, it doesn't say anything about Jesus. He's talking about how we are going to behold the Christ in one another. Page 65. And he's telling us how we're going to do it. So, we sing these songs on Sunday, la, 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 and they don't kind of resonate, but they're getting into our soul. They're giving us instruction. This is a song of instruction. So look what it says. I behold the Christ in you. Hear the life of God I see. Okay, you are in front of me. Hear the life of God I see. Not you. How did you show up today? Here's the life of God I see. I can see a great peace too. Have you ever run into somebody who's not peaceful? Somebody who's angry? Of course, we all have. Sometimes that person is us. I can see a great peace too. I can see you whole and free. Think about what he's telling us to do here. He is telling us to jump beyond our judgmental thinking nature, to come in and behold that universal truth principle underneath it all. Regardless of how your humanness is expressing, underneath it, you have the Christ life in you. I behold the Christ in you. I can see this as you walk. I can see this in all you do. I can see this as you talk. Ooh, that's a tough one. Because I don't know about you, but some ways people talk, it's kind of hard to behold the Christ in that. But I want to hold it. Because in back of it all is the principle that will never change. Regardless of who they are, what they believe, what they don't believe. It does not matter. God isn't saying, I hope I didn't offend them. God is a universal energy and a consciousness. It says, I behold God's love expressed. In your reading today, one of the passages is about accepting God's love. I can see you filled with power. Have you ever seen someone that just doesn't seem to have their life together and they're lost? People who are lost are not filled with power. They can't own their own power. I don't know what to do. I'm so lost. I'm just struggling, so I can see you filled with power. Not power like I've got power. I've got power in the Christ within. What were the attributes of God? Life, love, intelligence, and power. God is not loving. God is not powerful. God is not smart. God is power. God is love. God is life. And God is intelligence. And from that wellspring, we draw. I can see you filled with power. I can see you ever blessed. Wow. Isn't it nice to feel blessed? We don't bless one another like we used to. It's an important part. See Christ in you hour by hour. I think that's an instruction to me. Because what he's saying is, you got to keep on it. Even though I may not see the Christ in you, at first blush, hour by hour, I must see the Christ in you. I got to go over it and over it and over it. I behold the Christ in you. I can see that perfect one, led by God in all you do. I can see God's work is done. That's a strong affirmation. That's a strong song. This is instruction for how to live. And nowhere does it say, oh, and by the way, the second verse says it's easy. That's not what it says. I behold the Christ in you when you talk, even though you don't talk nice. I behold the Christ in you when you walk, even though you swagger and try and, be impossible to deal with. I behold the Christ in you when you're sick. I behold the Christ in you because I behold the Christ in me. And I must reaffirm it hour by hour. And know that God's perfect work is being done. How do I know what that work is? I don't know what the perfect work is in my own life. So I'm assuming I know the perfect work in your life? No, but God knows. You are here by divine appointment. You are here for a purpose. And I am here by divine appointment, and I am here for a purpose. And our life's purpose is to express this Christ within. To emulate that spirit and consciousness of Jesus of Nazareth, who said, I see God's work. I behold it in you. And therefore I know in your wholeness you can walk. Therefore I know your wholeness, you are free. Therefore in your wholeness I welcome you back to community. By your faith, daughter, you have been saved. So I invite you over the next week, as you read the affirmations from the book, to remind yourself that through the sort of the middle of this book, Whitney is talking over and over and over about principle. And although sometimes that principle seems like it negates our very human experience, our emotions, our thoughts, and our feelings, actually what he's trying to do, and what the early Unity people were trying to do, was break the hold of a God that's a Santa Claus, of a God that's a big daddy in the sky. It's the God of life, love, intelligence, and power that we all share, that is a part of all of our journey. So as we go through this week, I want you to hear that song over and over and over again. You know, somebody's up here joining me, and I know we need to get off the online right now. So I want to thank you for joining us, because we're going to stand and sing number 65. I invite you to join us. Thank you for joining us.